if we're ready to start, I don't mean to jump right in. Anything else? Okay. And one thing about the camera here, sometimes it does take a little bit to refocus if I move something. So I will try my best to make sure that it has that waiting time. And okay, so anyway, welcome. And I'm so excited that everybody is here to discover wire. And it's a little odd because this is clay day, but now we don't have any clay today. We've got the instructions on how to connect it. And I always put that in front because my desk is rather messy. But I wrote this book almost 20 years ago. And this is where I learned how to work in wire. And originally, this is a sort of a interview book. But what happened was I was supposed to write it with another woman from Softlex. And then Linda Musanti, that's who she was, she got a different job. And so there I was, contracted to write a wire book, and I knew nothing about wire. And so I flew to San Diego, and I studied with this person right here. And the reason I'm pointing it out is because this is Lynn Merchant. And Lynn Merchant is who I call the mother of all wire wrapping. She taught in San Diego, and a lot of people in the country flew to learn with her. And so part of the book is how what she taught people in San Diego, then they took somewhere else and then taught people and taught people and taught people. And this was the necklace that we did in her class. And, you know, I always kind of wondered, well, why didn't Lynn write a book? Well, Lynn is dyslexic, and she did not feel comfortable writing books. And so I tried as much as I could to, in my book, in fact, she spent great amount of time with me learning right practice for use of wire. And it's really kind of funny because a lot of people work differently in wire, but there's things, again, with your hands and your tools and things like that, that help you do right practice, or perhaps the most beneficial practice. So one of the things that Lynn found in teaching people is that the most important thing, well, not the most important thing, a very important thing is that you have the right tools. And initially, when she had run the classes, people would come with a whole different, tool set. And so, you know what, Amy, would you mind allowing me to record this, or do you have to do it to everybody?
I don't know if I am.
Okay, never mind.
No. Are you saying you're not allowed to record?
It's never mind. I was going to record it to my computer, but if you're recording it to Zoom, I think maybe that's the only thing. Don't worry. I just didn't understand why I'd hit the record button and it didn't work, but we're going to move on. Anyway, never mind. See, there's so much intricacies, you know, to the Zoom thing. It is being recorded.
Yeah, I'm recording it. I could go into settings and allow you to record.
Nah, that's okay. As long as it's, I was just going to record it as a backup. Don't worry. That's not a problem. Okay. So, you know, these 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces right here are Lundstrom pliers, and I have had them for a very long time, over 20 years. This is a new model of plier that is built by the beadsmith. Now, what happens in the craft industry is they keep coming out with new products. So I mean, even the size, that the way that the handles are made and things like that have been coming more recently, and they've made more ergonomic handles. But here's the deal: Lindstrom pliers were really used in computer operations to get in there, and they were very, very good pliers. So there's a difference. There's a huge difference. If you buy a plier from Pakistan, or if you buy a plier from China, you are not going to have the same quality of working as if you buy a $50 Lindstrom plier. And I think that Lindstrom has actually changed their the way that their pliers look uh, over the years as well. So these are probably, I don't know if this particular size is on the market anymore, but they all look different. And so you'll have to go like sort of like shopping. But I will say that the pecking order for the quality of pliers is probably the Lindstroms or any of the high-end soft flex. Beadalon has come along and made good pliers. You just want to avoid anything that is made in like China, I would say. But Germany is also a very good plier manufacturer. You know, any country that appreciates precision is going to show that in its products. Now, this is one thing that I want to show you. All my little things there are clipped out. See how this one has those springs right there? Well, Lynn always told us to take those out. And the reason being is because she used the pliers as her own, her hands as her own springs. So here I can move my pliers around and I don't have the tension of this one here. See, that's much more harder for me. There's more energy extended here when I'm gripping this plier because I've got this constant resistance here. So literally, I mean, it was painful. I pulled out all the resists on my Lindstrom pliers, and I actually use my fingers like this when I want to do open and close the jaws. So a lot of times when you're going to be using pliers, you may have to switch like this or sideways. I mean, you actually do move the pliers around. So you want to find pliers that are comfortable in your hands. So the four main types of pliers that you will use are something called this is called a chain nose. Okay, so it means that it's got a flat inside and a rounded outside. And it really gets in to little tiny places. And that's how you can get in there. Now, even in the Lindstrom pliers, if there's a burr or something there from the factory, you can take a file and make that flat. But the inside of this plier is very important too, because you don't want anything that has ridges, because those ridges are going to show up in your wire. So, you know, your tools are just as important as any of the techniques. So we have the chain nose pliers, which has a rounded outside and a flat inside and a point. Then we have flat nose pliers. And the flat nose pliers are to grip the wire, you know, in a square, to grip it differently than the chain nose pliers, because you can make corners. See, like whoops, like this, you can make corners. And then you have that flat piece where you can push it up. It all has to do with the grip. Okay, so we have chain nose and flat nose. Then we have, which I think actually are the most important, are your round nose pliers. And this is interesting because not all round nose pliers are actually round. So if you're trying to make a jump ring and you've got a plier that if you look down the barrel of the jaw and you see that it's not round at the bottom, chances are it's not going to be round all the way up the jaw. And it's very, very interesting when you first start looking, because you look down that jaw and you go, that's not round. And so that is going to affect your work. If you don't have a round nose, then it's going to be like an oval nose plier. So you want to check that out on your tools. Now, these two here are they're still round nose pliers, but look at the difference in the jaw. See, it's very, very different. This one is going to get in there and do little tiny wires and get into places better. And then this one, you may work at different places along the jaw. Now, there's something that about the jaw. Most of the time I work down here, but I've even bent my jaws up here. If you're constantly working up here and you're constantly working, big heavy wire up here, you are going to bend your jaw right there. And these are $50 soft flex pliers. And I have a bent jaw. My two little ends here do not meet. So once you invest in your pliers, then you want to be really nice to them. Like you want to learn how to use them so that they last and that they don't break. Now, I use different heavy duty cutters for cutting the wire. So this is what they call a flush cutter. It means that on this side right here, this is the flush side. That's the side that's going to make a straight up and down cut at the end of the wire. But at the same time, this side here is going to be a bevel. So what happens when you cut a piece of wire, which is what we're going to do next, you get one side flush and the other side in like a little point. So I'm going to pull this wire out and we're going to start, but I want to just ask if there's any questions about the pliers right now. Okay.
Well, hold on, Barb. There was one question that came in over the chat about the link for them. And I am looking, do you normally buy them directly from the manufacturer or from, is there a special, I just checked Monroe, they don't have them. Fire Mountain Gems has them, I see. Linda, go ahead.
I spent the money and bought Swanstrom. They're made in the USA, but they're very comparable to the Lindstrom pliers. Mine have a little screw on the side, but you don't have to buy all good tools is the reason why I'm going to say this. I spent the extra $55 or $65 on this because they are very precision based round nose pliers. They're big in size, so my hand isn't frenched on anything. But I do have still inexpensive tools until I replace them. But this is an American company called Swanstrom. And there's also another one called Veron, which actually Hobby Lobby carries these at a better price than you can find online most of the time. But these are very, again, precision. I saw somebody doing weather work with them, weather wrapping. And this is called a tweezer plier, but it's also another good company. So there's, if you can't spend close to the amount of money on this,
Linda, we're having a little trouble. You were kind of cutting in and out, but if the Lindstrom, I don't know the specific. I don't know the best place to buy them, so I'll look around and see if I can find something.
Amy, you might want to check Rio Grande.
I'm sorry?
You might want to check Rio Grande. They have pliers.
Okay, thank you.
There's lots of good substitutes. I'm not necessarily endorsing that everybody goes out and buys, you know, $50 pliers. What I'm trying to say is that if you're struggling with your work, don't assume it's you. You know, you can basically, you know, try different things. I mean, I think there's a lot of generous people around that might let you try out their pliers so that, you know, I mean, it's kind of like a spinning wheel. If it, you know, there's lots of different spinning wheels and you have to sort of try different things and you can get totally different results with different tools. So, I mean, that's really the point of what I was trying to say, is that in this particular case, the tools really do matter.
I
They
guess
are,
sorry, Barbara.
no, go ahead.
What I was trying to say, and I'm sorry that if I was cutting out, I was using my headphones and I'm not sure what was happening. My point, what I was trying to make was, I find that this is the most tool. I use this and it's the most important tool out of all my tools. So I spent the best money that I could get on this tool, where I have other tools, lots of other things that aren't as expensive, but I still have them, but I don't use these very often, where I use this all the time. I guess that's where, put your money on something you're going to use all the time.
Mhm,
That's, I guess, if you're not going to do a lot of wire wrapping.
right.
I guess that was my point. You don't have to spend a lot of money at once if you don't have it.
Okay, so I'm going to put these other things away. And, you know, like if you go to a workshop, you're going to learn all different kinds of tools to use in wire wrapping. Like this is what they have, a stepped jaw here. And then this is another side to the jaw, and it makes a rounded cup. But, you know, I mean, I could go on and on and about the different tools, but the point is that it's a fascinating journey. This is not just like you pick up wire tools and like this is all that there is. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And the whole wire industry has really blossomed because of the things that you can do with wire, the creativity you can do. So let's move on with a little bit about the wire itself. So the wire itself is in gauges, and usually it will, the lower the number, the thicker the wire. So this particular wire is, looks like 14 gauge. Now I'm going to use copper because sterling is very, very expensive. However, copper wire does not respond the way that sterling does. Copper wire is a different metal. And what they say in terms of the quality or the ease of use of wire is it goes, gold is king, sterling is queen, copper is the jester, and then brass, you don't know. But generally, brass is very, very difficult to work with because it's hard. So first of all, we have the gauges, which is how thick the wire is. So this is 14 gauge, this is 16 gauge, and this is 18 gauge. And I don't know which one this is. And this is, like Linda said, you gravitate to the one that you use all the time. Ear wires are generally 20 gauge. When you get into wrapping and you want to wrap different things, then you go down into the really small gauges, 22, 24, 26, 28, because those gauges you will be able to wrap around something else. Now, the property of all wire, and I'm just going to talk about round wire right now. I'm not going to get into square wire and all of that. The property of metal is such that when you work it, like when you bend it back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, you are doing something called work hardening. And so I don't know how many people remember coat hangers that you could bend back and forth and you could break off the neck. Well, the same thing happens with wire. So if I consistently bent this back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, I would eventually break it. And let's just see here if I can do that, but I don't know if I can or not. But the point is that you are work hardening this. You are making this wire harder to bend every time you manipulate it. And what happens is when you buy wire, you want to make sure that it is in a workable stage. So if you're doing a lot of wrapping and you're doing silver wrapping, you want to make sure that you begin with what they call dead soft wire. And as you wrap and as you wrap and as you wrap, that wire is going to get stiffer and stiffer and stiffer. But it needs to be dead soft so that you can wrap it. Now, if you're making an ear wire, you can make an ear wire out of something called half hard. It goes dead soft, half hard, hard, hard. And the hard stuff is the stuff that they make like pins and things like that. It's a piece of wire, but you can't even bend it. So that's not necessarily true about hard, but hard wire is going to be different than dead soft wire. And it has to do with the flexibility of this wire. So I can tell, I mean, it's hard for me to translate that this is getting harder to bend, but it is. And you can also see the kinks in it. This is why copper wire is called the jester, because it's kinky. It doesn't unkink when you move it back. But sterling has a more flowy property to it. And I will say that in terms of perceived value, that sterling is going to give perceived value to your work. So if you're going to wrap something, the fact that it's wrapped in sterling is going to be a lot different than if it's wrapped in copper. Okay. Remember I said those flat nose pliers? Well, you can go in here and you can unkink this by positioning the entire jaw and making it straight again. So there's a lot of different ways that these tools are allowed to be used that are not necessarily obvious. And I'm trying to, I did this so that there wasn't glare, and I just didn't want to. Now that kind of straightened my wire, but I've still got some kinks in it. If I wanted to work with a totally straight piece of wire, then I'd just pick a new piece. A lot of the wire that you see is on these spools. So how do I even make that straight? Because it's going to have a turn to it. Well, if you're trying to straighten the wire with just your fingers, then because there's this natural curve in it, if you spread your fingers as you're pulling the wire, then that'll make it more straight. If you just use your two fingers like this, it has a tendency to curl. So sometimes spreading it is going to give you a straighter piece than just two fingers together like this. It's really a lot about how you move your hands and move your fingers. So let's talk some more about fingers, because we don't want anybody to get hurt. And guess what? You can hurt somebody. You can clip off this little piece of wire and have it go shooting across the room. So you always want to be cautious of where you're pointing your wire. Like you want to point it down if you're going to shoot off the edge. If you're trying to just break a piece in half, you want to hold it like this and cut it like that. Now, if I didn't hold it with both fingers like that and I snapped this off, it could be that this end is going to go straight into my computer screen because the force of me cutting it is so much that it'll fly. And that's why I say, if you're trying to cut off little tiny pieces, don't underestimate the force of that piece flying. I mean, it can fly across the room and into your light socket if you're not watching. And so let's just see what happens when I'm going to point it down, because that would be etiquette. Oops, there it went. It bounced off of here and went over the onto the other side of the table. So a lot of times you have an area where you're constantly clipping and pointing it down. Now, the way to make that not jump is to put your finger here and then clip it. See, now it went into my finger. Look at the force at which it went into my finger. And the better cutters you have, then the better cut it makes without exerting that huge force. And it's much easier on your hand, the better cutter you have. Now, you notice all these little pieces, and this is going to be a little bit hard to see, but you did see the wire sticking into my finger. This is a flush piece. This is the flush side, and this is the beveled side. So when I want to make an connection for a bead, the proper right practice is that you have all your wire pieces are supposed to be flush cuts. So this is the part with the point, and this is the part that's straight up and down flush. So if I want to just simply put a wire connector through a bead, then I can guesstimate how much wire I'm going to need, and I can flip my plier around and I will have the flush cut on this side. So I'll have two flush cuts. So I did this bead because I want to make sure that I'm big. And I'm just simply, I'm going to start really, really simply here. And I'm going to show how to make a wire connector for this piece. Okay, and I'm going to use bigger wire for two reasons. Number one, it's because it's a bigger bead. And this is very much matchy-matchy. When you're doing small pieces like earrings, you don't want a really thick wire going through it. So generally, the gauge of the wire is relative to the size of the bead and also the strength that you need it to perform. Now, this particular piece that I started on, you know, it was big wire. Most of it is 16, 18, and 14 gauge wire. And then in this particular type stuff here, you'll get down to like 20 or 22 gauge that's wrapped around and wrapped around and wrapped around. I'm going to demonstrate in large wire because I want everybody to see. So I'm just going to start with this bead, which is this is a really, really old bead. It's a turned bead. So it's been turned on a lathe. That's how the pattern is in there. Okay, so I obviously want my bead or my wire longer than my bead, and I can start on one end if I want a loop. All I'm looking for is a lollipop. All I'm looking for is a lollipop on the end of this piece of wire so that it's round. Okay, so let me just do it like the wire, because you don't have to have the bead through it. You know, whatever is your comfort zone, then, you know, that's the way you should work. I mean, if you want to work with the beads in it, that's fine. But I generally make a loop on one end first and then put the bead in and then make the loop on the other end. So I'm going to make a loop. So I want a round nose plier to make my loop. What happens is the jaw of the plier actually becomes the mandrel. A mandrel is just simply something that you wrap around. Like a mandrel can be a stick. But the sticks aren't the best mandrels because sometimes the wire gets too tight and then you can't get them off the stick. Sometimes a wire tube is almost a better mandrel. So literally when you're trying to bend wire and you're trying to make something like jump ring, you're bending the wire around the mandrel, and this is becoming the form that you are bending around. So let's say, for example, this mandrel here just made a whole bunch of jump rings, a particular size. So I split this out and clip this off, and I'll save this because I'll cut that into jump rings that will go with my focal bead here that I'm going to attach. Okay, so let's use the round nose pliers as our mandrel. And again, if I use a small round nose pliers, I'm going to get that size of loop. But these pliers are never going to make that size of loop. These pliers might come close. So I will take it's a flush cut on that side. I'm going to take it and put it at the base of my plier. Now, if I want a smaller hole, I just move it up the jaw. If I want consistent loops, this is important. I'm not a very consistent person myself, but because I like variety. It's not because I can't be consistent. I get bored easily. And if I have to do the same thing, then that's just not as exciting for me. If it's, if you have consistent sizing in your loops, all of your work looks unified. So sometimes people will actually make a mark right like in the middle of their pliers so that they know that every time they turn this plier into a loop, they're going to have a consistent size. I'll just try at the end. Now, the way that you want to grab this is not so that the wire is poking through. It's so that you grab it as close to the end as you possibly can, so that you're not making a round thing with a little like straight thing on the end. So now this is going to be very interesting. The way that you hold the wire is that the wire is down here and the pliers are perpendicular. Then you can hold your thumb here because you're going to get a lot of leverage. And then you turn the wire, okay? And you can see it kind of peeping out right there. But you don't change any of your hands to the extent that you let go. You simply let the wire slide through the jaws of the pliers, and you continue to turn again in the same motion. It's kind of like if you've ever had a gear bicycle or you're revving up a motorcycle. So it's this way. So what that's going to do is it's going to make this beautiful round loop. Okay. Because it's this round loop that's very attractive. But this round loop is sitting on the side here, and I want it to be on the top. So what I'm going to do is when my loop is pretty much connected to the end, I'm going to turn it back. And then we have what we refer to as the swimming duck, like a duck swimming. I'm going to get something that's going to help me here. There we go. Sorry. I made these cards. I made these cards when I opened up Woman Creative, and it was because they're just a very, very good background. They're actually for, photographing the jewelry, but they really do help to see. So now I have this sort of swimming duck, and it's because I've pulled it back far enough that I can pull it back into place so that it sits like a lollipop. Oops, I pulled it back into place a little bit too much. So that it sits like a lollipop directly on top of this long shaft. And it's this straightness and consistency in this straightness that's going to build the wire work into your pieces. So I want to know if people are working along or if they're just watching, because if I need to wait for everybody to get to the lollipop here, then I would need to know, because I'm more than happy to just demonstrate, but I actually maybe should have asked if people were working along.
Well, Barb, I can't tell you, I've learned so much. And, you know, now that I'm seeing what you're doing, it makes a lot of sense how my stuff has turned out in the past. I'm not working along, but I have a question regarding a cutter. Would you mind if I?
Sure.
Okay. Like I've had just a collection of all sorts of wire stuff. Some of it is might be even like for fishing. It might be actual metal that's not really for jewelry. And when I use my cheap cutters, I end up, you know, ruining the cutting edge. Is that because I'm cutting like through something for a home project and not a bead project, or are my cutters just too cheap, or both?
No, the cutters are made for different things.
Okay.
I actually bought a new cutter at a bead store, and it was made for memory wire. And if any of you have ever used memory wire in a bracelet or a ring or something of that nature, you know how hard and springy that wire is. And that will actually ruin your pliers trying to cut that hard memory wire with regular pliers. So your question is really, really good, because I actually bought cutters that would tolerate a stronger, harder wire, because I didn't want to use my good Lindstrom cutters that would, you know, I would use on sterling or copper, and then grab like a piece of memory wire and try to cut them, because that would be detrimental to my plier. So does that answer the question?
Yes. Can you tell me what you have on, what kind of cutter you have on your work surface? Do you remember the brand or
You know,
the?
this is, I think it's Beadsmith, but there's
Okay.
Beadalon. You know, I think maybe what I should do is in a follow-up kind of recap on the tools is you know, point in a couple of different directions. Quite honestly, since I'm not in the manufacturing loop anymore, they have surpassed me in terms of product development. And like, I just don't, you know, I used to know and I don't know anymore. And so I mean, I've found out the hard way too, you know, it ruins my pliers. So, but I very specifically, you know, if you go into something like a bead store, I'm sure Chevron Beads downtown in Asheville will guide you to the memory wire cutters as opposed to sterling wire cutters. But it matters.
Amy, this is a pair of Craftsman that are Craftsman from Sears. These are flush cutters.
Oh, they have the little jaws that go this way.
But they're flush cutters. So if you cut one way, it's a V. And if you cut from the other side, it's flush. So they're the same as my better ones. These are from Eurotool, and they're the same exact thing. But these are flush cutters. So maybe you didn't have flush cutters.
I can't remember. And Barb, just to address what you had asked earlier about people following along, some of the people on the chat said they were just watching, and one person said she's going to
try to do it,
start doing stuff as you get more complex or get into it further. So,
okay.
Thank you.
So this lollipop that sits nicely on top of the wire here, if it's not closed, in other words, it's still open, then the way that you open and close they're called eye pins. The way that you open and close it is that you move it back and forth. This is a knot. You do not squeeze it this way to get it closed. You take your wire and look at the way that I am holding it. See, I'm not just reaching in here and moving it back and forth. I'm actually using the whole ring. And so I'm going to move it back and forth until it rests directly on top of the lollipop. Now there's two reasons to do back and forth. Number one is because the way to get the wire in place is to move it beyond the place that you want it, and then move it back to where it's supposed to be. So in other words, you overreach. Have you ever tried to, let's say, make something flat and you keep banging it down and the wire keeps springing up? Well, if the wire goes beyond the space that you want it to meet, it will stay in place much better if you move it beyond and then you move it back into place. So that's a property of wire. In other words, you move it farther and then move it back in, at least when you're doing this kind of thing. And that's also how you open and close jump rings and the eye pins. If this was a jump ring and I wanted to open and close it, which we'll do that, that's where you have two pliers and then you open and close it this way. See, now I have moved it open and closed quite a bit. So it's already starting to work harden. There's another way to work harden something, and that is you can take a bench block and you can tap the wire and that will work harden it. And they make different tools for that. Now you can put special effects on the wire by actually using what they call a ball peen hammer. And this particular hammer is stronger than the acrylic. You know, you're either the nail or the hammer. So, sometimes it depends on what hammer, you are. There's a rawhide hammer. There's a ball peen hammer. There's an acrylic hammer. This type of one might be used for work hardening. This type of a hammer, if you notice, it has a sort of a rounded top to it. That's because you can take the wire and actually slide it. So now I'm just going to flatten this a little bit. If I had used this one, this end, then I would actually be making texture inside of my loop. But I don't know if this is actually going to show up, but just that little bit of tapping there has flattened out my wire on the top. Now this would be an effect. And I know that this is hard to see. And I don't dare bring it closer to the iPad because, well, maybe I will, but you see, it's not really focusing, but it is flatter. It's flatter than this round part. So not only can you, make something that's, very organized, like with the loop on the lollipop, you can also put special effects, even in something as simple as like a bale hanging, just because you've done that. Okay, so now it actually spread a little bit. So this is also important when you grab the wire. If I were to grab this wire with my round nose pliers, I would actually make dents in that little flat spot. So I would choose to grab this with a flat plier because I'm not going to make little dents in that head pin because the jaws are flat on the inside. So now I can still move this back and forth and get that connection to completely meet so that nothing will slip out. Okay, so now let's actually put it inside here. So now I have this other end. Well, what am I going to do there? We're just going to make another loop on the other end. Well, I don't necessarily know. I mean, I don't want to make a loop way up here because then I've got all this space. So I want to make the loop as close as possible to the bead. So this is a situation where I can go in really, really tight with my chain nose pliers and get really tight in there and pull it back. So now my bead is secure in here. It's not wiggling, right? Okay. Now, if I want this hole here to match that, well, I guess this eye here to match that eye, then I'm going to have to grab my wire pretty much at the same place on the plier that I did before. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab it and see it's not poking through. So I've grabbed it the same way as I did before, and I'm going to turn and let go and turn. I didn't plan this, but this usually happens. You know, I have exactly the amount of wire that I need to make this loop, but that's not actually true. There's a little bit of overlap there, just a very, very little bit. Now I can go back in here and I can straighten that so that that eye is exactly the same as that eye. Now, and I'm still going to need to move it back and forth. Now, this is interesting because, you know, I told you not to use round nose pliers on something that you have flattened. The reason that I use chain nose pliers on even the rounded ones is, again, the grip. Because if you take your round nose pliers and you grab it like this, then you're making little dents inside this wire. So again, I'm going to take the chain nose or the flat nose pliers and, oops, wrong side. And I am going to move this back and forth. I'm watching so that everybody can see. And then I will have it exactly there. And it should be a lollipop that's on the top. Now, here is a tricky part in terms of matching things. If I want, you know, this to be flat here and that to be flat there, then I have to be very careful that I don't smash the polymer. And, you know, that's something that I would put the piece on the side here and perhaps be very, very, very careful. And all I really want to do is give what I would call the essence of flatness there. And that's something that, you know, when you get into your designing and your wire designing, then you're going to find that maybe some things just don't work. You know, like you can't make flat wire too close to the polymer because it'll smash. But now I have a bead here. Okay, so let's try another one. And sometimes if you need to make your holes bigger, then just go ahead and use what I would call is a pin vise. And then your drill bits can unlock here. And these handheld drills are really convenient because you don't have to have a drill bit or anything. The reason that I am talking about this is because the hole size matters. Especially when you get into linking things. Oh, this is interesting. This is a little crumbly. Well, I'm not going to take a bunch of time doing this, but I'm just trying to make this hole bigger so that that I get the wire through it. And I'm not being very, it might come out the other side at a different place, but that's okay. This is interesting. I didn't expect it to crumble, but you kind of get the point. The bigger the holes and the bigger, how can I say this? Sometimes people make the holes too big or too small. And then their earring is kind of sort of stuck. Let me explain this. Like I have to make sure that that hole is big enough that this piece moves. And this all has to be calculated in because this piece is so thin here. If it's too thin, it'll be very vulnerable right there. So matching the hole with the wire really makes a difference. And I found through a lot of experiment that I was making these little tiny holes at the top of earrings, and then there wasn't enough movement between the wire and the hole. Okay, here, I think I got it. Okay, so now we're going to make another kind of connection because it's a more secure connection because this one here, I can still open and close this, you know, and I can attach it to a ring or a bail or something like this. But let's say, for example, I'm using thinner wire and I want to make sure that, well, let's just say I want to use thinner wire. So this is probably an 18 gauge wire, and you'll notice that I'm straightening this first. And I'm going to do a longer piece. Now I have a ruler here. I'm just not a kind of person who measures very often. And if I want to make sure that this is flush, I can actually see it, that it's not flush. So I'm going to take my pliers. And I mean, I have my computer in front of me, and the last thing that I want is for my little teeny piece of copper to go in between my computer keys. So I'm making sure that I'm not shooting little pieces of wire in there.
Barb, I'm squinting when you do that because I don't want the wire to hit me either. I just feel like it could come shooting out at me.
You'd be surprised. You know, it's funny, in a class, I specifically tell people don't to do that, you know, and then they're like, oh, you know, they're actually surprised. But let me just do this. This is this is one of the things you're going to find with Carol. She's so amazingly neat that she doesn't lose what was in her hand like 2 seconds before. And again, I'm using bigger pieces so that everybody gets to see. Because when you connect little tiny beads, then it's not quite the same. You know, you'll get that really tiny hoop. So this time I don't want to make necessarily this big of a loop. Let's just say this was an earring component and I wanted just a little tiny loop. Well, and I used a really thin gauge wire. Well, obviously, if it was a really tiny thin gauge wire, it wouldn't have the same strength as a thick wire. So, you know, I don't want my component to fall off. I mean, so this time I'm going to wrap the end around the loop, but I still want a nice big loop. And so I am going to, this time I'm just going to bend it this way. And this time I'm going to go in I'll pull it out again. I'm amazing. I always pull the bead out and do at least one loop without the bead in it, but you'll see what I'm talking about. Let's just say I wanted a smaller bail at the end. So, okay, so I'm going to do the same thing I've done over and over again. I'm going to hold this and it's like perpendicular. So this time, because I want a nice even loop, I'm just going to push it around this mandrel. And then I'm going to let my hands go again. And this time I have this tail. So now I've got the loop, right? With a tail. There's my card. The loop with the tail. Huh, my bead just rolled off. That bead really did not want to be used. I mean, what is up with that bead? I'm going to show you without the bead in a minute. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap that around this. And so this wire is going to go around. I actually really do need that bead. Well, not that bead. We'll use the next bead. It's funny when I watch Zoom classes, it's almost about the same about the desk as it is about the what you're doing. Okay, so now I can take maybe my pliers and hold this while I simply wrap this around there. Now that took some strength for me. And the reason is because it's thicker wire. But you can see that this is a very, 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 very secure type of thing because it's been wrapped. There's no open and closing here. So if you're going to do a jump ring, you have to actually use the jump ring to open and close. So let's just keep going here. And if you notice, I'm going to cut it off, but I'm also going to cut it off with the flush end. And so let's just see, that did bounce around all over the place. So it really, really is important. A lot of the times they make these pads so that the wire sticks in here and it doesn't like bounce off of here and goes somewhere else. So now I have this piece and I can take my round nose pliers and I can adjust the lollipop so that it's sitting directly on top of the bead, right? It's just really, there we go. So it's sitting directly on top. Now, if I want the bottom to match, I can do the same thing. But what if I just want to hang this here and I want it not necessarily to match, I just want like a spiral at the end of it. So you've got a eye pin on the top and you've got a spiral on the bottom. So what I'm going to do is show you how to make a spiral, because that's a really cool tool to use in the wire connections, et cetera, et cetera. So I need to keep the bead in there because I'm going to make the spiral. Again, if this is not a flush cut, you want to take your pliers and go ahead and cut it off. So when you are making a spiral, the inside loop is going to be as big as where you put the wire into your pliers. So in this particular time, I want like a little, well, let's do this. I'll make it a little bit bigger. So same thing. I'm going to turn it, let it go. And this time, I'm not going to make it meet exactly. So this is kind of an important part in making really, really, really good spirals. Because you're going to make it so that this wire does the work in wrapping around itself. So this right here is going to become the mandrel itself. So I'm going to switch pliers again. And, you know, it's really funny because when you get, you know, good at this, it doesn't take very much time at all. You just know where you're going and you're going to get a lot more wrapping done in a short period of time. I'm being very slow. Now, what I'm going to do is I am going to hold this at the base of the jaw, and I am going to push up, and I am, in fact, I am going to start to wrap the wire around itself. This is actually not the roundest. I should have left more gap. And I am going to put the wire inside the bottom of the jaws of my plier because I have the most leverage. And I don't want to be holding the bead out here and like saying, oh, I'm going to move it up, you know, move it this way, because you just don't have as much leverage. So I'm going to go in with my thumb right here, and in very, very, very little increments, I am going to push. I'm trying to make it so that you guys can see. I am going to use my thumb and keep moving my pliers and push that wire around itself. So in other words, the inside loop becomes the mandrel itself. Come on, iPad, do your thing here. This is very, very tight. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. I'm sorry that I don't have my new equipment, because this was the reason I bought it, because it's a 12 meg camera instead of a 5 meg camera. Now, one thing you may notice is this one is going this way and that one's going that way. You can, that's okay. You can make it go like that. So when you put your thumb down there and you inch it up little by little by little, that's when you're going to get the really tight spirals with no gaps. So now I've got this funky spiral thing at the end of my bead, and I'm going to go in here and pull it back. I'm going to overreach, remember, you know, now it's on the other side, and then I can push it back into place to where it sits directly at the bottom. And so now I have a bead that has a secured top and then a spiral bottom. So this would be the eye pin, and then that would be the bottom. Now I can still put another ring in there. So let's take a look at jump rings. So I wrapped that mandrel with the wire. And let's say I want to make jump rings with this. Now, the movement in a lot of these big pieces here, it has to do with the flexibility of how big these loops are. And there's all different combinations in this particular one, but you don't want a piece that's real rigid. So the size of the loops and the number of connectors are what's going to make them flowy. It's going to make it like flow, because, and then it's going to lengthen your necklace too. So the size of these rings matters. See, like here's there's a bigger size there. And you want to take into account that, yes, you can attach this to this by just opening and closing this. I mean, I certainly can attach this, but it's not going to have the flexibility. See, it's just, it doesn't move the same way as this moves. And it's because these two pieces are held with a jump ring. So that's my goal here. And it depends on what size jump ring you want. Like here's another coil that I did earlier. These are two different size rings. So these are all design decisions as well. You know, it's kind of funny because wire is so basic and it's really taken off and there's like a ton of different people that are doing it, but it's these little intricate design decisions that makes it really an interesting medium because, you know, everybody's going to approach it differently. But the flexibility of your necklace is going to depend on how many jump rings you have in between and how big those pieces are. So let's just put this back here. And how we make jump rings. Okay, so I have this coil. Now you can buy jump rings. I mean, I certainly endorse, quite honestly, buying jump rings. It's the one thing that even though I have a lot of wire, I do not make jump rings. If you buy them professionally, then they have very straight cuts. You can buy them in oval form. You can buy them in all different kinds of metals. But you know, if you're in a pinch and especially if you want the wires to match, like I don't know that I necessarily want brass on my copper pieces, then I can make my own jump rings. So I've got this coil and I'm going to make a flush cut. Okay, so that means it's flush right there. If I want this side to be flush, I literally have to move my plier and I will get right up to the next cut. Where am I? And so just watch what happens with my hands, because to tell you the truth, you can do this pretty quick. So then that results this one in having a beveled cut. So I have to cut it off again. So I'm going to cut that off, flip my plier, cut my jump ring, flip my plier, cut off the beveled piece, flip my plier, cut the next string, flip my plier, cut the bevel off, flip my pliers, and cut. See, and I'm making all these jump rings. Well, they're going to be compatible with my pieces. And, you know, and sometimes, you know, if you grab something and just cut off another piece. But again, you know, I've got my finger here. I'm actually, you know, I'm leaving these little pieces fall down, flip my pliers over again, cut mine off. And I don't have any more here, but I've got 4 jump rings. So these are all open. And if I want to open and close them and connect these 2 pieces, then I can do so. And you will move the, okay, let's see if we can get this. You will move, you know, I really do appreciate the opportunity to do this in front of an audience because it helps me to understand too what I need to do for people to be able to see. I did teach some wire classes down at the CDC or the CCCD earlier, and we discovered that wire is a very difficult thing to teach on Zoom because of the need to be so close. So I'm going to move this back and forth, and that's how I would connect this. Let's put another one in there. And then maybe this time I'm going to put it right through the spiral. and move that back and forth until it comes exactly. Now, because these are pretty big wires, see the movement in here, as opposed to maybe just one jump ring, or as opposed to the two beads being held together like that. And this is actually kind of a design thing where I've used the spiral to connect the wire to the next bead. Okay, let's see here. Are there any questions at this point too?
I have a question about how you were making it hard, or your very first loop that you did on the green and yellow or green and orange bead. Was that just a design element to flatten the first lollipop, or was that
Yes.
actually for structural to make it?
Well,
Or-
both actually. It will
Okay.
work harden it. It will make this particular piece harder to go back and forth. But it also is sort of a design feature. This one here, you don't have to worry too much about it being work hardened because it's wrapped around itself, and therefore it's not going to come loose. I mean, if I was
Okay.
a professional silversmith too, I would probably go in and solder those jump rings together.
But for just everyday Joe purposes, the wire that comes, 22 gauge or 24 gauge, we can just do like you're doing without soldering or making
Well,
hard, and it should be okay.
yes, but see, if it's dead soft, it's going to be softer than half hard. So basically, when you go to buy sterling, you're very conscious of whether you're going to be wrapping it and wrapping it and wrapping it. So you want dead soft. But this is copper wire, and its strength is more going to be about the gauge rather than whether it's work hardened or not. But when you really want your things to be together and stay together, especially if you're doing long necklaces, then you need to take this into account. Okay, there's another thing that you can do to do the security of whatever wire you're doing. And that is, instead of one ring, you take it and you put two rings in there. And I know this is hard. And then that's called a split ring, which if you've ever had a keychain that you use, and it's actually not one ring, but it's two rings, this is called a split ring. So now this particular, and this would be an example of work hardening. Okay, there, it broke. So now this one here is two loops, and it's called a split ring. So if I wanted to attach this here, and again, I can just separate that. And this is like a keychain. It's going to go in here. And the reason perhaps that I have to pull it a little bit apart just to be able to get it in. The reason is that if I've flattened that, then I can, it's made this thinner. So maybe I'm thinking, oh, if this person has got a whistle on the bottom of my pendant, I want to make sure that it doesn't fall off. So now I've used a two ring to hold the piece. You see? And they should match. Like one shouldn't be up here and one shouldn't be down there, but it's a split ring. And you'll actually find split rings in wire that's this size. And that's so that instead of soldering wire together, or instead of making sure that your wire components are strong, if you've got that split ring and things, then it's not going to fall off either, because whatever I attach down here is not necessarily going to fall off.
Barbara, can you flatten that split ring?
You know what? That's a really good question. Actually, yes, and actually, no. If you, let's say you tried to flatten this with the hammer, then you're going to get these two wire pieces competing with each other. So if you want to do something like that, then you probably need to put something in between the two wires, like this, and then go ahead and flatten. See, because then these two round wires aren't going to be smashing into each other. And the same way, if you're crossing over a wire, if you're crossing over two wires, then just to hit them with the hammer is going to take away the strength, because they're going to dent each other as they're crossed over. Okay. I mean, it's so fascinating when you really get into it, that, I mean, you can go on and on, because the design decisions are so, they're really, really subtle, but they're really, really impacting. So now I'm going to do a spiral. And so this has been sitting around for a long time. I'm going to make it straight. Now you can also use the edge of your table if you want to make it straight. We always started with straight wire. I never actually started with wire that was curving. But, you know, everybody has their own particular habits. I just want to pass on the way that I was taught, because I was taught from somebody really, really good. Now, because this is a bigger wire, this is probably 16 gauge. Yeah, this is 16 gauge. And I'm doing that so that you can see. And again, I can see right off the bat, I need to make this into a flush cut and point it down. I'm going to make a spiral. Let me do this. Let me cut that off. I'm going to make a spiral at both ends, and it will meet in the middle. So essentially, the length that I'm going to make is that one. It's two spirals. They're connected. They're like a figure eight. And quite honestly, in right practice, that's really the way that the eye pins or head pins, or that's the way it should go. Like this loop up here and that loop up there should be in a figure eight. So literally, like if it just gives it more strength. And then there's also a certain visual balance that it has as well. Did I do that right? Let's see. Yeah. So in other words, the opening is on this side, and then it's on this side on that one. It's really funny because these details you might not really look at when you actually look at a piece, but your eye notices these details. And so when you're actually doing really, really good wire work, the consistent right practices will make really, really pretty pieces. Here's another kind of figure eight. See? And then I added a little spiral fun thing there. So I'm going to show you how to do a spiral. I'm not going to show you how to do wrapping because, and we'll do we can do a, you know, this would be called a cage where you wrap the wire around the bead. And I'm just going to say that the spiral is also part of the cage. So this is the link that we're actually going for, because everything that you do in wire wrapping sort of builds on the same principles. So again, this time I'm going to use my smaller pliers. Going to grab them. It's not poking through, and my hand is here. It's the leverage that matters and gives you more strength. So, and I'm not holding the wire down here and trying to move it. I've got it really close there. So I'm going to, whoops, didn't quite grab it. And I'm going to let go. And now I'm almost turning my, and I'm going to take this and wrap it around itself. So now I have, again, the mandrel. Going to hold it there and hold it at the jaw of my plier. Okay, iPad, move it up, let it go. 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 Okay, so now I have one on one side, and it's a really nice tight lollipop. So now I'll go around to the other side. And if I'm a figure eight, then I want to make my loop this way. So I will grab it. And I actually need to cut it again. So again, I'm going to, and let it slip. And then it's going to come up. Oops, I'm sorry, up around itself. So see, that's a really, really nice round thing there because I've let it come up around itself. Switch my pliers so that they're flat nose, because if I would have grabbed them with the round nose, I would have put dents in there. You know, it's interesting because you'll see different work where people have dented the wire. And I mean, like literally mashed it up. But that's also one of the reasons that I showed you how to flatten it, because if you have, if you're rough with your wire, you know, with all the pliers, and then you can kind of flatten it out a little bit, then it doesn't show those dents. So this, there again, I'm going to move it up, change, move. See, I can do this really fast too. See, and now I say I've got, that's bigger. I'll just move over here. And it's starting to get stiffer on me because it's harder. So this is already starting to work hard. You can see me straining even to make this figure eight. Okay. So, but what the reason that's, see, it's not going to pull apart. It's not going to pull apart. And part of that is because it's bigger wire, but it's very much apart because it's been work hardened. Okay. The spirals are really, really instrumental in a lot of the other things that, a lot of the designing, put it that way. Now these are glass beads, but I want to talk just a little bit more about designing, even with the things that we saw. I mean, here is, it's got an extra bead and then it's got a wrap. Here is one that this is a double one on one side, and then there's a bead that flows and there's a head there. All these different links add up to a certain amount of interest, but in even a most simple connection, you can add beads either side and wraps, all different. Okay, so I'll tell you what, why don't we finish with caging the bead? And the caging has to do with this right there. You know what, I'm gonna cut open my piece because I wanted to use this piece for caging. So Bye-bye. Okay. So I'm going to need a pin going through the middle of the bead, and we will use this to basically cage it. So let's do this. And you're seeing these things done over and over again, but then you'll see it's not that hard in terms of speed. Now I want a fairly large loop, just because it's a bigger bead. It's part of a design decision. And also because I'm trying to show everybody. So let's see here. I'm going to make, again, my lollipop. See, and this time, as opposed to the spiral where I left a little gap there so that I could wrap around itself, I put that one right up to the wire itself. And I'll grab this and pull it back. Oops. Yeah. And then push it back on top. See, it's okay for me to position, position this and use these pliers to move that lollipop directly on top. And then I'll just make sure that it is connected there. And okay, so this is how this works, because this is flat right at the moment. You can take chain nose if they're that small, and you push this up into a little cone. Okay, so you do it in the spiral, not on the bead, which is kind of like, what? I thought you wrapped it around the bead. No, it's not that intuitive. It's like a trick. So this way I can get, I actually call this like Brunhilde's bra. Well, Lynn called it that too. So, so you've got these little cone things that are on either side of your spiral. So now I've got a spiral that's not necessarily a flat spiral. It's got the cone on either side. So what I'm going to do is flip this around so that the cones are on either side now. So I'll take this, put it through the cone, put it through the bead, and then I can unwrap my spiral and stretch it until it goes over the other end and put my eye pin through it. Oops, I'm not quite over the other end. There we go. So now the bead is caged. You see? So it's got the spirals on either end and the head pin. And then this end here, I can make the head pin again. Now, the reason that these pliers matter so much is because you can get real tight in there. And if I chose to put other decorative beads on either side here, that's a design decision too. So here we go. And here we go. And if I need to put that back a little bit just so that it's a lollipop, that's okay too. But I'm moving between all these tools so that I don't dent the wire and that I get the leverage that I need. So now this is caged. There's a kink there a little bit, which I can flatten out with my pliers. And I don't have a round bead either. I particularly like to cage the long ones. But if there's ever a kink like that, then you can go in and actually accentuate it. You can see it's right there. There's the kink. But that's how you would cage the bead. So now even though I cut that off, I can do it with another one. And so now I can put this through the split ring. And again, you have to kind of, you over accentuate. So if you want that split ring, this is kind of a neat trick. If you want that split ring to be really tight, and I'm hoping you can see this, I can go like this with my, see how I'm moving those two wires together so that they come firmer together. Now they're much tighter.
That's
So
cool.
that's that. And are there any questions? Okay, so
Barb, I just want to tell you, you're doing, I mean, I am just completely in awe of watching you, honest to goodness. I just am blown away by,
oh,
and
thanks.
you make it look so easy. I know, I'm just really appreciative of what you're doing. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, you know what? I'm a person who actually loves my mistakes. Well, not all of them. And there's some I particularly don't love. But one of the things that I really, really want to stress with wire work. Thanks, Amy. That's very, very sweet. Thank you. This is an earring drop that it doesn't have quite the flexibility that it necessarily should. I mean, I've got the head pin connected right to the earring. You know, I mean, that's like one issue because you can see it get kind of hung up. It's not necessarily that flowy. But really, the real problem with this thing here is that this is such a long piece right here that if it got bent, see, over and over again, it would snap. And this is actually sterling. And sterling is pretty good about not bending or not about flexibility. But this would be the problem if you used really thin wire and then tried to stack long pieces. See, it just went. So if you have a long necklace and you've got 3 or 4 beads on it, then you have to take in the vulnerability to those beads being flexible. So that doesn't work very good. Like, you know, I made these, but the reason that I tore it apart here is because they're really not very good to sell because they're vulnerable for what you just saw. They're also vulnerable for, like, if a customer would do that, you know, I don't necessarily want the customer to have to go back to the original. And I actually embedded that wire inside of here, the polymer piece itself. But instead of doing what I did before, even if I embedded the wire into the clay, it would be smarter if I made the little loop here. So there's 2 ways I could make a loop, but I don't have I don't have a tail long enough to wrap around like we did on one of them. Maybe it's the one is it the one I cut off? Yeah. See, when you start, if I were to make a loop up here and I wanted to wrap around, I'd have to allow myself a longer tail so that I could actually hold it. But I'm going to take it here and just make a little one, and then I'll cut off the excess. So now I've got this little tiny ring right at the top of my earring component. I can go in with my cutters and cut as close as possible. And then I can go in with the flat ones here and make that so that there's a little tiny ring right at the top there. And then that is better way to connect components than just, you know, like making them all on one strand that's vulnerable to that. And I mean, experience is the best teacher, because I would have liked to have sold these, but they have a design flaw to them. And it's really, really interesting the more that you do these things, because you start to appreciate the subtleties of things, like how they flow and perhaps the size of the wire. Like, you know, this one here, you can mix all different gauges and it has some real interest to it.
Albert,
Yes.
okay, I have a question. When you're doing polymer clay, and say it was flat, not like a round bead, and you want to make a hole and then put for earrings, but you need that clay in there. How do you judge?
That's a really good question, Angela. And actually, let me,
Like that piece you got in your hand, let's say you put a hole in right there. How would you judge to put the wire for the hoops in so you have enough flexibility so it doesn't break?
well, that's, you know what, that's the delusion. You know, at first you think you need a small hole because you don't want a big hole at the top of your piece. And so let's see what happens when I put a bigger hole here. You need a big enough hole that it's going to give some mobility and that the wire isn't going to get necessarily stuck. So here I have a fairly big size hole. And now I can choose what size wire I want. Also depending on what else I'm going to hang it on. But let's say, for example, I wanted to hang this little dangly thing off of here, you know, I probably would choose this size wire just because it would match more. I could choose a smaller size wire, but anytime you choose a smaller size wire, then you kind of have to see whether it would slip through. There's a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of just seeing is believing, that kind of thing. So where's my jump rings? Here they are. So let's say I'm going to attach this to either a strand, which might be that, or I'm going to attach it to an earring. I need to make this hole big enough so that this curve can actually fit inside the hole. So I have to open it wide enough and then put it together. So now this earring component has a lot of dangle to it. See it, it's like really dangly. And it's not going to fall out because that gap there, which actually shouldn't be any gap at all. If I go back and forth, you just inch it up to where there's no gap. And that's where the flush cuts come in as well. Because if you've got a pointed one and a flush one, they're never going to come back together. So now I've got this, and I can put this on an earring component, whoops, or I can put it as a, let's just say I wanted to be this to be like the final dangle on my piece. See how it's like here, fishy, fishy, fishy. But even at this here, even this here, if I put another little jump ring inside that, it would have even more movement. Now, I actually brought another sample. This is in relationship to what you're talking about too. My friend made these earrings, and these are very, very thin components. I mean, they're really, really thin. She had a hard time with the size of the clay, like right here, because that's the clay that's got a hold. So if she was able to go inside there and actually wrap around it. So she made like an extra little, she made extra wraps that went down into that component there. But literally, this is extremely vulnerable. And if she's working with a really, really hard wire and trying to hold on to this, chances are that little space of clay in between the wire and that, she has to use her pliers so that she's not using the clay as leverage. She's using her wire tools as leverage so that she encapsulated the piece. But see, she did what I told you not to do. She lined them all up. So, this is vulnerable in terms of sale. So the design decision is that you figure out how you're going to get this flexibility in your pieces and not necessarily make them all one strand on a piece of wire. Angela, does that answer the question?
Yes, and I guess it's trial and error because the piece that you just did, how would you judge what size wire for a jump ring to put in there so that you would have the play? And I guess it's something you just have to learn by doing it.
Well, you know what? If you pay attention when you look at other work, then you can actually figure it out.
Okay.
And I mean, after I learned this too, I was looking more and more and more at what other people had done to see how they got that flexibility. So that's almost like a homework or a precursor, when you do your design stuff, is like, go to a jewelry store or an art store and see how they get that flexibility in there.
Okay.
So I want to just, any more questions? Want to wrap this up with one of my favorite artists. This is work by Celie Fago. And Celie is just an exquisite designer. This is polymer clay, precious metal clay. She made her own earrings. She made her own wire stand. It's so cute. This is polymer clay. This is a whole different thing. This is like what, this is very, very thin gauge. It's almost like wire weaving. It could also be called wire wrapping. But I just want to show you how beautiful these earring holders are, if I can. We're going to try to zoom this and see, she's even got a little coil there that adds a little bit of finesse there. One of the things that she has done to this is she has dropped it in liver of sulfur. And so she has stained all these things. Even though this is sterling, she's still stained it. So the precious metal clay and the little wire wrap there, she's stained. You can do that with the copper too. I have had great results in dumping the polymer into liver of sulfur. I don't want to make promises of your results because there's many different brands of liver of sulfur or whatever on the market. But I've dumped the whole thing. Then if you stain it with liver of sulfur, what happens is it oxidizes everything, it turns it black, and then you use like steel wool to polish, or just very, very, very fine steel wool will highlight the metal. Now this one here was polished not too long ago, but that's sterling. That's the difference between liver of sulfur and then it having been polished. I don't know. I don't know. It's funny. I don't. Well, these earrings are Celie's earrings are maybe 22 years old now. So they've oxidized over the period of time. If you use argentium sterling, then it's not supposed to tarnish. If you use fine silver, it doesn't necessarily tarnish, but you're not going to have the strength. sterling has other metals in it to give it strength. And then that's why the little stamp is, I believe 925 when the sterling stamp is on it. And so, you know, there's a lot to wire, but there's also a lot of benefit to reap with wire. And I mean, I left it for a while because, you know, I have lots of interests, but I've come back to it because I find that I just use it all the time, even if it's just something as basic as using different kinds of jump rings in different ways. Now, here's another example. See the wire on this faceted lemon drop is much thinner. So another thing that if you're going to use any kind of gemstone or pearl or something of that nature, then you have to take into consideration the hole inside the gemstone, because you may have to move to a smaller gauge wire to even get the wire through the drilled hole. And I saw some posts on Facebook about Franklin's bead show, and I would strongly recommend that you go there with a list, because what happens when you go to a bead show is you get all these pretty beads and then you can't get any wire through them because the holes are really, really thin. You know, but with polymer, we can make our holes bigger for sure. So, I mean, even something like this, which is like, see how flexible this is? And really, this is the only one that has the big wire through it. But, you know, I have used my very, very, very basic wire skills to do this. So that's why I'm a big fan of learning how to work with wire, is because it's very empowering. So that's it, folks. Are there any more questions?
If I could, I just would like to add, Barbara, about straightening wire. Somebody many years ago did a wire demo at the Guild, and one of the things they showed us was a wire straightening tool. And I work with a lot of wire, and this has been a game changer for me. It's artistic wire, and it's just called wire straightening tool. You can get it online or you can get it at Michael's.
Amy, oh, there, thanks.
And so I like to leave my wire on the spool when I do it, but it's like I said, it's a game changer.
Oh, let's see the tool
Can
again.
you, Cheryl, can you hold it up a little bit higher in front of your face? There you go. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
And can you do it one more time, Cheryl? Like, so I couldn't see it before, like, and hold it higher. Okay.
How are you attaching it?
It just wraps around the wire.
Oh, see, that is I've never seen that before. And that is a new.
So it comes together like that, because it starts like that and you just wrap it around the wire.
That's fabulous.
Wonderful. And look how straight the wire is.
That's fabulous. You know, and you said it was by Artistic Wire?
Yes.
You know what?
I had just written into the chat that you need to get a pair of these, Barbara, which are wire straightening pliers. I didn't know about the thing that Cheryl has. That's new. But these work fabulous, and you can replace these.
Wow.
You can replace the little grips because it's just plastic. But Cheryl, gosh, I've never seen that.
That's fabulous. That tool is just fabulous. And it's the reason I asked if it was with Artistic Wire, it's because I knew the president of Artistic Wire when I wrote my book. And this is an example of how fast the industry has moved forward. And that tool is phenomenal. The reason that I did want to explain that, to show you what I had showed you with a minimal amount of tools, is because when Lynn, you know, taught everybody how to do this, the way that she learned was that she had a boyfriend who was a surfer, and they went around the tip of Africa into like India, Pakistan, Afghanistan. And she literally learned from the Afghani people how to do this. And while her boyfriend was out surfing. And then, so she learned with the very simple tools how to do these things and how to do with her fingers, you know, without the tools. But those tools, you know, you know, I'm heading straight to the store for that one. That one is a great tool. So, I mean, you've come generations of tools here, which is just fabulous. And quite honestly, I mean, I have another bag of tools here too. And here's another version of some of these things. This particular one has a rounded jaw. But yes, I mean, there are so many wonderful things that you can empower yourself with if you really study what these different things are for and how they work. So, I mean, I have a number of friends that are teachers in wire wrapping that, again, reflect more and more advancement with the craft. And if the guild is really, really interested in bringing someone in, like maybe next year or something like that, to do, you know, a more extensive wire thing, you know, just speak up and we can ask like Deborah Mauser or, you know, some other people that are known for their wire work to come and teach. I think Cheryl might know some people too that are in that field specifically. And one more thing, you know, like when people talk about wire, there's a real traditional work that is flat gold wire, and you wrap cabochons. And at places like William Holland or in some of the lapidary areas of teaching, when they say wire wrapping, they are referring to cabochons that are wrapped with these flat gold pieces. And actually, I don't have one in front of me, but I have other samples. That's not quite the same as what's been popular in terms of like this type of stuff. But the whole, I'm just seeing the whole thing just explode, especially with really, really innovative wraps and weaves. And I saw a dragon made out of wire that was wrapped around a cabochon the other day. There's some great Facebook groups, wire wrap tips and tutorials. And that one is really worth looking into. Anything anyone wants to add or questions or?
I just wanted to say thank you. What a wonderful demo. I was enraptured the whole time. I mean, you really provide a lot of inspiration for those of us who who don't have the confidence or the knowledge that you do. So thank you so much. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording.
Here's my bead that I did, my caged bead.
What?
Here's my caged bead. Can you see
wait,
it?
we can't see it. Hold on.
Will it sing burst?
Hold it a little bit more in front of, there you go. Okay, now pull it back. Pull it back okay, now closer. Okay, now I can see. Okay.
Great.
Oh, that's awesome.
Good job.
Did you do that just now?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
I just learned it and I did it.
All right. All right.
Thank you, Barbara.
Oh, you are welcome.
I also wanted to say that